Imagine this, a quiet, ordinary farmhouse. Then suddenly, a sound. Just a series of knocks, sharp, clear, and happening in the dead silence. But these weren't just any knocks. These sounds were so powerful, so filled with what people thought they meant, that they'd kickstart a religious craze across the entire country. Millions became convinced that the line between life and death wasn't just thin, it was wide open. Now this isn't the start of some spooky old novel. It's the actual, documented beginning of a movement that started with two young girls, and what they said were conversations with the dead. They claimed they could hear them, and for a good while, the world desperately, eagerly believed. Let's rewind to the mid-19th century. America was a whirlwind of change. It was a time of huge optimism, people heading west, and this intense religious energy known as the Second Great Awakening, which got everyone thinking about personal faith and spiritual experiences. But there was a dark side too. Sickness was rampant, losing children was heartbreakingly common, and the massive shadow of the Civil War was looming. In this world of hope and sorrow, where old certainties were fading and people ached for a real connection with loved ones they'd lost, something truly strange popped up in the tiny, quiet village of Hydesville, New York. It would revolve around two sisters, Margaretta Maggie Fox, who was about 14, and her younger sister Catherine, or Kate, just 11. Their story isn't just about kids playing pranks or a clever trick, if that's all it was. It's about how very specific claims, made at a very specific time, tapped into a deep longing in society. And it gave birth to spiritualism, a movement that would shake up traditional religion, bring comfort to the grieving, empower women in ways no one expected, and leave a lasting mark on America and even beyond. This is the story of the Fox sisters and the rapping spirits that signaled a new age of belief. The year was 1848. The Fox family, John, Margaret, and their two youngest girls, Maggie and Kate, had just moved into a simple wooden farmhouse in Hydesville, New York. Turns out, the house already had a bit of a reputation. Local stories whispered it was troubled by strange noises. For the Foxes, life was pretty normal, dictated by the usual rural routines, until things started getting weird. The disturbances began, growing stronger through the cold March nights. And these weren't your average creaks of an old house settling. These were distinct, responsive knocks. Then, on the evening of March 31st, 1848, what had been a creepy annoyance turned into what seemed like a conversation. The family later said that young Kate, maybe with a bit of kid-like daring and real curiosity, challenged whatever was making the noises. "Mr. Splitfoot," she supposedly called out, using a common nickname for the devil. "Do as I do." She snapped her fingers. And to everyone's shock, the same number of raps answered from the walls. You can just imagine the air in that little room, thick with fear and a wild kind of excitement. Margaret Fox, the mother, then started asking questions. "How many children do I have?" Knocks sounded out the right number. Then, the big one. She asked the ages of her daughters. Again, the invisible whatever it was, rapped out the correct ages. Over the next few days and weeks, they worked out a basic way to communicate. One knock for no, 2 or 3 for yes. Eventually, they figured out a system where the spirit would rap as someone pointed to letters of the alphabet, slowly spelling out messages. Through this painstaking process, the entity said it was the spirit of a peddler, Charles B. Rosna. He claimed he'd been murdered in the house years ago, and his body was buried in the cellar. This story, of a restless spirit looking for justice or just to be known, was powerful. It gave a purpose, a tragic backstory, to these otherwise baffling sounds. News of what was happening couldn't stay cooped up in the Fox farmhouse. Neighbors were brought in, first to see for themselves and maybe expose it as a hoax, but many left convinced, or at least seriously stumped. The house became a local sensation. People flocked to witness the Hydesville rappings. Picture it, dimly lit rooms, everyone silent with anticipation, the young sisters at the center of it all, and then Those unexplainable sounds that seemed to come from the house itself, or maybe from somewhere else entirely. What were Maggie and Kate really going through? Were they terrified kids caught up in something they didn't understand? Or, as people would later claim, were they masterminding a clever trick that quickly got out of hand? Reports from the time often paint them as innocent go-betweens, just passing on messages from the spirit world. Still, the pressure, the attention, the sudden jump from being unknown to local celebrities, it must have been a lot for such young girls. Their father, John Fox, seems to have been mostly confused by it all, while their mother, Margaret, took a more active role in setting up the communication sessions and inviting people to watch. The local community was split. Some were scared stiff, thinking it was the devil's work. Others were mesmerized, seeing it as a miracle, a direct line to the afterlife. When some bone fragments and teeth were supposedly found in the cellar, it seemed to back up the peddler story, even though a full skeleton wasn't found back then. Whatever the truth was, the events in Hydesville had started something huge. Those whispers from beyond were about to become a national roar. Those strange happenings in the Hydesville farmhouse might have just become a local ghost story if it weren't for Leah Fox Fish, Maggie and Kate's older sister. Leah, who was quite a bit older, was a music teacher living in Rochester. When she heard about the incredible events, she headed straight to Hydesville. By all accounts, Leah was sharp and ambitious and had a good sense of what the public wanted. Whether she instantly believed the rappings were spiritual or just spotted a golden opportunity, she quickly became the mastermind behind her sister's budding careers as mediums. With Leah in charge, the spirit communications became more organized, more public. She basically became their manager, protecting them to some degree, but also definitely promoting their supposed talents. The decision was made. They needed to take this unique show on the road. A major turning point came in November 1849. The Fox sisters, with Leah, gave their first public demonstration at the Corinthian Hall in Rochester, New York. This was a big deal. It was probably the first time anything like this was presented to a paying audience, shifting from a private curiosity to a public spectacle. The hall was crammed. Skeptics and believers alike turned up to see the Rochester rappings. The pressure on Maggie and Kate must have been incredible. They weren't just talking to Mr. Splitfoot in their bedroom anymore. They were performing under the intense scrutiny of hundreds of eyes. Rochester's success gave Leah even more confidence. The sisters, now a traveling sensation, started touring. They went to Albany, Troy, and finally, in the spring of 1850, they hit the big time, New York City. In the city, they set up shop at Barnum's Hotel, which was owned by a cousin of the famous showman P.T. Barnum himself. The irony of this connection, Barnum being the king of entertainment and, to some, a bit of a con artist, wasn't lost on people at the time. But it also put the sisters right in the middle of a city that was hungry for new and exciting things. In New York, their seances were the talk of the town. They didn't just attract curious crowds. They pulled in people with serious social standing and intellect. Their hotel rooms were swamped with visitors. These weren't the spooky, darkened seances you might picture from later Victorian times. Often, they happened in fairly well-lit rooms, with the sisters seated and observers watching closely. The knocks would come seemingly from walls, floors, or furniture, answering questions, spelling out messages. The sisters held countless private sessions and bigger public demonstrations, raking in a lot of money. It was said they could make hundreds of dollars in a single night, a fortune back then, especially for young women from a simple background. This financial success no doubt changed their lives dramatically, pulling their family out of rural life and into a level of wealth and fame they could never have imagined. But it also made their story more complicated, as making money always brings up questions about motives and whether it's all real. The journey from a supposedly haunted little farmhouse to the drawing rooms of New York City's elite was shockingly fast. Fueled by the sisters' apparent abilities, Leah's smart management, and a public that was more and more fascinated by the idea of talking to the dead. You really can't understand how the Fox sisters and their rappings blew up without looking at what was going on in America at the time. The mid-19th century was a hotbed of spiritual exploration. The Second Great Awakening had swept the nation, pushing the idea of a personal connection with God, often outside of traditional church structures. Many Americans were starting to question the stricter, more doom and gloom ideas of Calvinism, like predestination, and were looking for spiritual beliefs that were more hopeful and comforting. Spiritualism, as it started to form around what the Fox sisters were doing, offered exactly that. One of its biggest draws was the comforting idea that death wasn't a final goodbye, and that loved ones who had passed on weren't gone forever, but could actually be contacted. Think about it. In an era with high death rates from disease, accidents, and the constant threat of war, grief was everywhere. The thought that you could get messages, advice, or just a bit of comfort from departed family and friends was incredibly appealing. Spiritualism suggested that spirits kept learning and growing in the afterlife and could share their wisdom with the living. This changed the whole idea of death from a scary unknown into an ongoing spiritual journey. The movement really took root across all sorts of people. It wasn't just the uneducated or easily fooled who were drawn in. Big-name intellectuals, writers, and social reformers were among its followers, or at least very serious investigators. Horace Greeley, the powerful editor of the New York Tribune, became a major supporter and mentor to the Fox sisters. He gave them credibility and helped them move in higher social circles. His backing was a big deal. Greeley was a respected public figure, and his interest helped make the new movement seem legitimate. Seances in New York in 1850 attracted literary giants like William Cullen Bryant, the historian George Bancroft, and the novelist James Fenimore Cooper. Maybe more surprisingly, spiritualism clicked with various reform movements of the time, like the fight against slavery and the push for women's right to vote. Figures like Sojourner Truth and William Lloyd Garrison, both passionate abolitionists, went to the Fox sisters' demonstrations. Many spiritualists believed that messages from the spirit world often called for social justice, equality, and change. Plus, spiritualism gave women amazing new opportunities for public speaking and leadership. At a time when women were mostly shut out of powerful roles in traditional churches and public life, many became well-known mediums, speakers, and writers within the spiritualist movement. The trance lecture, where a medium would supposedly speak while guided by a spirit, became a way for women to share their opinions on social, political, and religious issues. Andrew Jackson Davis, who had been a little-known clairvoyant writing about something called harmonial philosophy, saw his own reputation skyrocket after he invited the Fox sisters to his home to see their abilities. He quickly became a leading thinker and organizer of the growing spiritualist movement, helping to define its beliefs and practices. The appeal of spiritualism even reached the White House. Mary Todd Lincoln, overwhelmed by grief after losing her sons Willie and Eddie, and later her husband, President Abraham Lincoln, held seances trying to connect with them. This sad historical fact really highlights the deep human need for comfort that spiritualism seemed to provide. The movement spread like wildfire. Spiritualist groups popped up in towns and cities all over the country. Newspapers and journals dedicated to spiritualism were launched. Mediumship got more varied than just simple rappings, expanding to include table tipping, spirit writing, trance speaking, and even supposed materializations of spirits. What started with mysterious knocks in a New York farmhouse had, in just a few years, turned into a major religious and cultural force, with millions of followers, profoundly changing how a generation thought about life, death, and whatever comes next. The Fox sisters, whether they meant to or not, had tapped into a very deep well of human longing and belief. It's really incredible how deeply these events touch people, capturing the imagination of a whole nation searching for answers and connection. That desire to understand the unknown, to try and bridge the gap between worlds, It's such a powerful human thing. If you re-finding this journey into the past and the mysteries of belief as fascinating as we do, please think about subscribing to our channel and hitting that notification bell. That way, you won't miss out on our future explorations of other historical puzzles and the amazing stories that shape our world. Right from the get-go, alongside all the belief and fascination, the Fox sisters and their spirit rappings faced intense skepticism and serious questioning. While lots of people were quick to accept the phenomena as real proof of an afterlife, others were just as determined to expose what they thought was a clever, maybe even cynical trick. The scientific and intellectual folks of the time were especially eager to investigate these extraordinary claims. One of the earliest and most persistent ideas was that the rapping sounds were actually made by the sisters themselves through some kind of trickery. Investigators, including a group of doctors from the University of Buffalo, suggested the girls were making the noises by cracking their toe, knee, or ankle joints. This theory started to catch on, though actually proving it during a seance, where the mediums or their supporters often controlled the conditions, was tough. Committees were set up to test the sisters under stricter controls. Sometimes their ankles would be tied, or they'd be made to stand on pillows to try and figure out where the sounds were coming from. Their clothes were checked for any hidden gadgets. Amazingly, many of these formal investigations didn't really conclude anything. No clear evidence of fraud was publicly found during several of these controlled tests. The sisters, especially in their early years, seemed pretty good at producing the phenomena even when being watched closely. Or maybe the investigation methods just weren't good enough to uncover their techniques if they were faking it. This lack of a smoking gun made believers even more convinced and really frustrated the skeptics. How could simple joint cracking fool so many smart people, including experienced investigators? Other accusations included the use of ventriloquism, though the sharp rapping nature of the sounds made this seem less likely for many of them. Some suspected accomplices or hidden mechanical devices in the rooms where seances took place. The way seances were often run also added to the suspicion. Dim lighting, the expectation that something supernatural would happen, and the emotional investment of the people attending could create an environment where suggestion and misinterpretation were easy. As the years passed, the sisters' performances became more inconsistent. The constant demand for seances, the pressure to deliver convincing spirit communications night after night, must have been exhausting. Both Maggie and Kate, and Leah too, to some extent, started to struggle with the pressures of their unique kind of fame. Alcohol became a serious problem for both Maggie and Kate, a common escape for people under huge public and personal stress. Their increasing drinking not only affected their health and personal lives, but also damaged their credibility as reliable channels for the spirit world. Stories started to spread about seances where the sisters were clearly drunk, or where the phenomena were weak or didn't happen at all, giving their critics more ammunition. There was also tension from within. The relationship between the sisters, especially between Maggie and the more business-focused Leah, became strained over money, control, and perhaps different levels of belief or cynicism about their own work. Were they all equally convinced of the truth of spiritualism, or did some have more doubts than others? Maggie, in particular, seemed to grow more and more fed up with the life of a public medium. She longed for a more normal existence, away from the constant watching and the demands of the believers. The spiritualist movement itself, while growing, wasn't without its own internal critics and controversies. Rival mediums popped up, some with even more sensational claims, and arguments raged about the true nature of spirit communication and how reliable various phenomena were. The very movement the Fox sisters had sparked was evolving beyond them, creating its own standards and its own internal power struggles. The cracks in the veil weren't just appearing in the Fox sisters' credibility, but also in the larger structure of the spiritualist movement as it dealt with its own rapid growth and the inevitable challenges of keeping belief alive in the face of human weakness and ongoing skepticism. That initial wonder was slowly but surely being chipped away by doubt, personal tragedy, and the relentless questions of those who refused to just believe. By the 1880s, the initial fiery popularity of spiritualism had cooled down a bit, though it was still a pretty big cultural presence. The Fox sisters, once the undisputed stars of the movement, had seen their fame fade. Their personal problems, especially with alcohol, and the constant controversies had taken their toll. It was in this atmosphere of declining fortunes and simmering anger that the biggest challenge to spiritualism's origins came crashing down, not from an outside skeptic, but from one of its very founders. On October 21, 1888, the New York World, a major newspaper known for its sensational stories, published a shocking interview with Margaretta Maggie Fox. In it, Maggie announced she was going to publicly declare spiritualism an elaborate hoax and expose the methods she and her sister Kate had used for 40 years. Her reasons were complicated and deeply personal. She was reportedly furious with her sister Leah and other leading spiritualists who had criticized her and Kate, especially about Kate's drinking and her fitness as a mother. There was also a clear financial motive. She was paid a hefty sum for her expose. And maybe, just maybe, there was a lifetime of guilt she wanted to get off her chest, or a desperate need to finally free herself from a secret that had defined her entire life. True to her word, shortly after the newspaper interview, Maggie Fox appeared at the prestigious New York Academy of Music. In front of a large, paying audience, she gave a public demonstration of how the spirit rappings were actually made. She had a doctor examine her foot, and then, with her shoe off, she started making distinct rapping sounds by cracking her toe joints against a wooden stool or the stage floor. She explained that as young girls, they'd discovered this ability and it had started as a game. They also revealed an earlier method for making sounds, which involved tying an apple to a string and subtly bouncing it on the floor, or dropping and rebounding it to create a series of knocks. The demonstration was a bombshell. Here was one of the originators of spiritualism, a woman whose name was basically synonymous with spirit communication, declaring it all a fraud and showing exactly how it was done. The reaction, as you can imagine, was explosive. Skeptics felt completely justified. For decades they'd argued that the rappings were a physical trick, and now Maggie herself had confirmed it. For devout spiritualists, it was a moment of huge crisis. Some felt betrayed, their faith shattered. Others, though, refused to accept the confession. They argued that Maggie was desperate for money, forced into it, or mentally unstable. They pointed out that the confession couldn't explain all the phenomena associated with spiritualism, especially the more complex things reported by other mediums. Adding another layer of complexity, Maggie Fox later took back her confession. Poor and shunned by many former friends and supporters, she found herself in a tough spot. Some historians think she might have genuinely regretted her actions, or perhaps she was influenced by remaining believers who wanted to bring her back into the spiritualist fold. Whatever the reason, her recantation only made things murkier, allowing believers to dismiss the confession as a temporary slip-up. Remarkably, despite Maggie's detailed confession and demonstration, the spiritualist movement didn't just collapse. By 1888, spiritualism had grown way beyond the Fox sisters. It had its own well-known mediums, its own books and journals, its own organizations, and millions of followers whose beliefs were deeply set. For many, the truth of spiritualism didn't just depend on the honesty of its original founders. Their personal experiences and seances, the messages they believed they'd received, and the comfort the movement gave them were more powerful than any single confession. The movement had truly taken on a life of its own. The later lives of the Fox sisters were largely tragic. Kate also struggled terribly with alcoholism and died in 1892. Maggie, despite her brief return to spiritualism after recanting her confession, lived in poverty and died in 1893. Leah, the sister who had arguably engineered their public careers, lived until 1890, holding onto her belief in spiritualism, or at least its public image, until the very end. The curtain had indeed fallen on the Fox sisters. There lives a harsh reminder of the burdens of fame, the complexities of belief, and the enduring human drama that was at the heart of a worldwide spiritual phenomenon. The story of Margaretta and Kate Fox, from those seemingly innocent knocks in their Hydesville farmhouse to becoming globally known as the founders of modern spiritualism, is an incredible journey, woven with threads of belief, skepticism, what society was yearning for, and personal tragedy. Their path from obscurity to fame, and then for some, back to a sad end, really captures a unique chapter in American religious and cultural history. The impact of the Fox sisters, whether their initial claims were real or not, is undeniable. They were the spark for what became one of the biggest new religious movements of the 19th century, drawing millions of followers across America, Europe, and even further. Spiritualism, kicked off by their activities, didn't just offer a new way to think about death. It mixed parts of existing Christian beliefs with new ideas about ongoing spiritual growth and the possibility of communication between the living and the dead. This brought huge comfort to a society dealing with high death rates and the devastating losses of war, especially the American Civil War. Beyond just religion, the spiritualist movement, with the Fox sisters at its origin, added a lot to America's rich collection of folklore and supernatural beliefs. It found its place alongside other local traditions, showing a widespread fascination with the unseen and the unexplained. And importantly, spiritualism played a surprising role in social reform. Many spiritualists were active in causes like abolishing slavery and fighting for women's right to vote. The movement itself also gave women a rare platform to take on public roles as mediums, speakers, and leaders, challenging the restrictive gender roles of the Victorian era. The big question, of course, still hangs in the air. Were the Fox sisters clever hoaxers from day one? Or did they, as young children, stumble onto something genuinely unexplainable that they later learned to copy and maybe even exploit? Did a playful prank snowball into a worldwide phenomenon that got too big for them to handle? Or was there a real element of mystery in those first Hydesville rappings that even they couldn't fully figure out? Some historians say that the truth of what happened is in some ways less important than its massive cultural and social impact. The world believed, and that belief reshaped how people thought about spirituality. The saga of the Fox sisters tells us a lot about human nature, our deep desire for connection, especially with those we've lost. The incredible power of belief to shape individual lives and whole movements. And the fascinating, often tricky, dance between faith, passionate hope, and critical skepticism. You can still hear the echoes of those simple knocks in Hydesville today, in modern paranormal investigations, in current seance traditions, in the ongoing fascination with near-death experiences, and in that persistent human quest to understand what, if anything, lies beyond the veil of this life. The Fox sisters might have faded into history, their personal stories tinged with sadness, but the movement they ignited, and the questions they raised, definitely continue to resonate. So what's your take on the Fox sisters? Were they brilliant masterminds behind a grand deception, or just accidental messengers for something beyond our understanding? Or maybe, like a lot of things in life, the truth is a complicated mix of both? We'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas in the comments section below. And if this journey into one of history's most intriguing spiritual mysteries has grabbed your interest, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps our channel reach more people who are curious about the past and the fascinating enigmas it holds. Thanks for watching.